Alwyn, welcome to the show. Good morning to you.
Thanks, Michael. Nice to be here again.
Just on that, though, the PPTA, it's not over, is it? They're just going into arbitration. There's no acceptance that they're going to accept the final outcome, as I understand it. What do you understand?
Well, I understand that the PPTA are an appalling organisation, and you're right, complete hypocrites. And they've just gone about this in entirely the wrong way. So if the last 3 years for kids had been amazing, had been solid, maybe some industrial action, you could see it kind of as a bit of a trade-off. But the last 3 years haven't been. And they've turned this year into another very fractured year, and they've done it deliberately. They've done it to try and put pressure on the ministry and on the government. They've had very little concern for how the students are affected by this, families are affected by this. They've been completely, without creativity in terms of how they've gone about it. And so they've lost the room, and you're exactly right. A lot of teachers are realising the best way to improve their salary is not pay their PPTA fee. And they're just over it. And you're right, they're also getting it in the net from parents. But the teachers are on the parents' side in many, many cases, as are the schools. They know they've got a job to do, and they're not doing it. And we're also in a situation where we have a genuine attendance crisis, and the PPTA have brought the sector into disrepute. So I think your question with regards to arbitration, my understanding from this point is that the terms that they have agreed would mean that both sides would accept the results of the arbitration, but even getting together for that is something like 4 to 6 weeks away. I didn't know there was another paid union meeting this Wednesday. And again, that's just appalling. I mean, what can you tell them at a meeting that you can't tell them with an email?
I know.
And the head of the PPTA, this guy, Chris Abercrombie, he press released saying that before the last round of sort of rolling stoppages or rostering kids home, that the teachers had given them a mandate to do this. Well, they told the teachers, they instructed their members to vote against accepting the ministry's offer. They are appalling.
Now, there's a couple of things, but now that it's, like I said, it's a bit like Putin's Russia. If I can probably make a dramatic analogy, because there are schools now that are starting to pull out of the NCA system. I'll talk to you about that more. But there are other schools and teachers that are starting to say, listen, the system in which we are at the moment, particularly with the Ministry of Education, how it's going about NCA in particular, is so bad that we are in actual fact going to be handicapping children and students for their lives as a consequence of how inferior our education is becoming. You quoted last week a piece that was written by Dr. Andrew Rogers. He is the head of Department of Chemistry at one of New Zealand's better performing schools, St Peter's College in Epsom, saying that the science curriculum, so we've talked about history curriculums and we've talked about the basics of maths and English, but the science curriculum is so bad now that he's concerned that, kids will simply not get any grounding in a relatively basic curriculum subject. Can you take us through that, please?
So one of our huge issues in New Zealand is that we have very little science qualifications to with primary and intermediate teaching. And having set up middle schools, etc., so getting kids in at year 7, a lot of them, the most they've done is put together baking soda and vinegar. And they've really got very little science background behind them. And so our year 7 to 10 program is very thorough, because year 7s, year 6s, year 5s, they love science featured properly. And I remember one particular year, a boy who had struggled or he felt he had struggled through our Year 7, 8, 9, 10 science program. And he went off to a large secondary school in Auckland at Year 11, and he came sort of screaming back to us to tell us that he'd come second in his whole year group in the science knowledge test to begin the year. And we're like, wow, well done. And this wasn't a child who, necessarily intuitively got things. He had to work hard at it. And so Andrew's dead right, but it doesn't, it's not something that simply emerges at high schools. It's something that we need to take care of in our primary schools in what I would call a curriculum simplification.
Can I catch you on that one immediately, Owen? Because this is something that I've been prattling on about for as long as I've been prattling, basically. And it is that the people that we are employing to teach has become a crisis problem. And you've just mentioned about science. That's because we've got too many women teaching at primary and intermediate level, 90% of the staff, of the teaching staff, maybe more, who have largely a liberal arts or a teaching degree as their background. And you've just said, well, not many of them actually have a BSc, so they don't know the subject. In maths teaching, it's been identified, I think, by Education Review Office, it might have been somebody else, you'll be able to tell me, that one of the reasons that math has been taught poorly is because largely female teachers, a female-dominated workforce at primary level, don't like maths themselves, don't understand it, and therefore find it impossible to be able to impart any learning or enthusiasm to their charges. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I don't think it's to do with whether they're male or female, although
I do.
in our systems there has been for a long time, that physics was male sort of thing.
Yep.
And chemistry probably also tending that way, whereas biology, and who knows why that developed in the first place, but it did. And so I think that's a hangover. The solution to that, though, is that in our primary school entrance requirements, that every person going into primary school teaching should have a minimum of level 2 NCEA, pure maths, like, the academic standard math course, and at least 2 sciences. And therefore, and I mean, you prefer more, but at least that's a very good start where, if you're teaching primary school, level 2 NCEA should be a reasonable level. But if you take it from a child's perspective, I mean, we most of your listeners, you and I, we've had kids, and kids adore stuff to do with science. Whether it's cooking with them in the kitchen, whether it's digging a hole in the backyard. Once with my kids, we had the Christmas holidays, and we decided to dig a hole to see how far we could get. And again, finding stuff, discovering stuff, bringing worms in, finding frogs in the garden, looking. Kids adore that stuff. Mm. And it's a real springboard to talking to them about proper science. But I actually think one of our key issues here, and it goes to our entire curriculum refresh, is that we are ignoring what science is as a subject. And we're ignoring the international status of it. And therefore, we're hamstringing our children, which is what Andrew Rogers was talking about.
Now, can I ask you another obvious question? And that is my son's school, which is has just announced last week, in actual fact, that it is leaving NCA Level 1, with the exception, I'll come to that in a second, to embrace the Cambridge system, Alwyn.
Okay.
And I've now noticed, so I looked up the Cambridge system over the weekend and got quite a fright that there's actually an association of Cambridge schools in New Zealand. And there are not an awful lot in the South Island, but there are an increasing number of what I would call mainstream state secondary schools that have joined them. Burnside High School, Cashmere High School, Christchurch Boys High, Western Heights High in Rotorua, Hastings Boys High, Wanganui High School, which is about as woke as you could get, have joined Southland Girls. And then, of course, you've got all the upmarket schools, largely in Auckland, including St Peter's College that we've just talked about in Epsom, Hamilton Boys High, the biggest boys' school in New Zealand, Hamilton Girls High, Hillcrest High School, and then another state co-educational school. Now, these schools, I can understand all the, what you call upmarket schools, the Decile 10, the private schools joining, the sort of Scots colleges of this world, etc., although I don't think they have joined, ironically. But what about, Wellington College has though, what about all these state secondary schools, and this last one was St Kevin's College in Oamaru, which is a co-educational Catholic school, about Decile 5 or 6, I think. So not exactly, your Decile 10 private school place. Can I ask a question? Why are all these schools leaving to go and embrace the Cambridge International Examination procedures?
There's two reasons that schools appear to be bailing from Level 1 NCA. One is that they don't believe that the curriculum is rigorous enough. And when you add to that the ministry say it's optional, plus you can get Level 1 NCA by simply getting 80 credits across Level 2 and Level 3. Those credits count back to Level 1. Some are leaving, as I said, because they don't consider it rigorous enough. But then you've got other schools that are leaving because they don't want the Year 11s to be under pressure of sitting assessments. And I think that's a poor reason. And it shows that they've not really got a solid teaching and learning program, and are building kids with capabilities and the ability to deal with, tests and exams or assessments that may be high stakes. For the schools in New Zealand that are not doing Level 1 NCA, but are not going to Cambridge, I would strongly recommend that they reach out to someone like Rangitoto College that is designing their own Year 11 certificate, and ask if they could buy it and work with it and kind of form a network that way. Rangitoto is a remarkable school, remarkably led, large staff, and all that kind of thing. So I think that would be a very good option for them. For the schools going to Cambridge, to me, it makes sense.
Now, Cambridge is it's what I'd call quite old-fashioned. So it's really sort of like, it's old school cert. I've got a series of assessments. They do coursework, so that they do coursework. So there is some internal assessment, but it's really at the end, it's a very test-based, assessment-based regime. They do tests during the year, and then they have this massive, obviously these end-of-year examinations for Cambridge, and you end up with the equivalent of A and O levels, I think, from the British point of view. It's extraordinary to me, really, Alwyn, that we've lost so much faith in the education system that state secondary schools are heading to Cambridge as a solution.
Yeah, and that's all on the ministry. And during this process of curriculum refresh, my understanding is that a lot of staff from some very good schools, in those meetings, professional development or curriculum development sessions, etc., they're basically being rebuffed when they've talked about things like, pure science, accurate science, when they've talked about academic rigour. It's almost a bottom-up process. So instead of lifting students, it's taking the curriculum down to where some of these people perceive students should be. Which again, there's no long-term future in that. It's stupid. The ministry has lost significant credibility. Most schools are now realising that the best way to get their students here is to go around them. And you're right, it's tremendously sad, and it shouldn't be the case.
Listen, when you end up with what's going to be a multi-assessment environment for our New Zealand secondary school students, that is, and it's fragmented like that, as you've just talked about, Rangitoto having its own, got Cambridge now. I know you've got some schools have got International Baccalaureate, you've got NCA Level 1 or not. I'm just sitting here going, how the hell did it get this bad? that you have lost such trust and such faith in an education system that parents must surely be thinking to themselves, are my kids going to be educated enough for the international world?
Yeah, and parents are the key to their children's education.
Yep, we know
and
that.
Sometimes they've got to make hard decisions by shifting schools and things like that.
Yep.
And I think I've said to you before, I do a data process in August for the school leavers of every high school in New Zealand. And clearly some parents worrying that school's not doing so well and things like that. So I talk about schools where you can leave your kids there and you know they'll do fine. And St. Peter's and Epsom is very much one of those, where Andrew Rogers teaches. And then you've got what I call can-do-well schools, where you've got to be a bit more involved. And you've got to make sure that you understand what's happening in the curriculum. And you've got to be not only active, you've almost got to be an activist. And then you've got schools where you may not have a choice, but that your child goes there. So it could be small town, area school, or all the other schools in the area are full, and your child's got to go to this particular school. If that's the case, then you've got to be in there, boots and all, and you've got to stick with your kids in the evenings and help them with their homework and all that kind of stuff. But as you pointed out, schools are now taking this on and going, we're not satisfied with what the ministry's offering. We're really concerned about curriculum refresh. And I mean, if you read through it, the average parent could make no sense of it. It's a complete mixture in language of English and Māori. Now, there is nothing wrong with either of those languages, but when you put the two of them together in just about every sentence, you're shaking your head going, what the heck that just said? And again, for a lot of parents, this should be transparent. It should be simple. I was saying before, we've lost what science as a subject is, and I think in the piece that you were referencing about Andrew Rogers, I said, look, go and have a look at, or go and have a read of Bill Bryson's books on
yes,
science.
Yes, that's right.
Wonderful.
Yeah, no, it's really
Absolutely
interesting. He said
wonderful.
If you wanted to learn science, just go and read I think they've made more relevant to adolescents and to children. Bill Bryson's original.
Absolutely, and kids will once again.
Yeah.
Alive. I mean, this is probably a little bit of a plug, but under Alwyn Poole Substack, I've got a lot of stuff that looks at this, and any of your listeners can go and have a look and subscribe if they like. But there's quite a few people. I mean, you've had, Professor Elizabeth Rata on, and she talked so clearly about the difference between academic knowledge and socio-cultural knowledge. And I guess the thing that I would add to what's going on in schools at the moment is that it would be amazing to bring 10 of the world's best mathematics and science curriculum writers to New Zealand to write our mathematics and science curricula so that our kids can match the international standard.
But isn't the problem, can I just pick you up on that? I'll tell you the reason why that's not going to happen. Alwyn, it's not going to happen this reason. Because the Ministry of Education don't want confirmation that these kids are going to fail. You see, if you got that kind of international standard brought in for maths or science, even for reading and writing, you got some of the best from Britain or Australia or Canada to come and assist you in that curriculum. And then you set a testing regime for, let's say, NCA Level 1, you're going to end up with exactly the same results that the Ministry of Education discovered 2 years ago after getting pressure from the universities, that our kids simply don't have the basics in place to be able to deal with that advanced curriculum at that level. Isn't that the fear that they have?
Yes, it is. But so a good friend of mine is a guy called Paul Kingsman, who I think was the first New Zealander to win a gold medal in the pool for a significant period of time at the Olympics. And one of the things he always talks about is that his coach...
It was a bronze medal, wasn't it?
Yeah, in the backstroke. And he was pretty unlucky at that Olympics, the old Russian sport in the submarine, which people can look up. But Hilton Brown never put their national rankings up. he always put their international rankings up. And so Anthony Moss and Paul Kingsman and others knew where they stood internationally. So when they went and competed, they had a realistic expectation. We have to do the same with our kids with academics. And not just our decile 9 and 10 kids, our decile 1 kids up, or what you would now say high equity index students.
Yep.
And so you're right, it'll be tough, and I'm sure for Paul and Anthony, that was tough. You know, they had to train extra hard. They had to, really come to terms with where they stood and think about their aspiration. But for New Zealand over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we need to do this. Otherwise, we just keep slipping down because other countries are doing it. And you imagine if you're a European country, you've got, up in Europe, you've got Finland, you've got all these other countries that are striving. And so the competition is obvious. We've got to make the competition obvious in New Zealand because we're a long way away. And we're doing some weird stuff. So when I got an email from someone the other day, and this will blow the mind of your listeners. So it came through like this, and it's about a free webinar in New Zealand. Promote, I almost can't read it. Promote gender inclusiveness in early childhood settings. ECE. Professor Mara Sapon-Shivan, Syracuse University, US, will discuss how early childhood teachers can approach gender non-conformity. I mean, what are we doing for kids? And into that, the piece I wrote in the Waikato Times about the number of antidepressants issued to children and teens increased by 53% in the last 5 years. And a lot of it is because we are just punching down on them with all this ideological nonsense from a whole range of areas. And it's just no longer a normal childhood for them. Now, let me kind of be clear. Clinical depression can hit anyone at any time, and sometimes we just don't know why. But the anxiety that has been generated by all of these things is different. And we're ripping childhood away from kids. And some of them are finding nowhere else to go except medication. And that includes things like lack of exercise, poor diets, but a lot of it's what's happening in our schools.
Alwyn, we've got to go to 11 o'clock. Thank you very much for joining us again this morning and for giving your erudite and informed take of what's happening in the education system, which is, it has to be said, not an awful lot, except failure.